In 1863, a handful of Victorian engineers decided exactly where London's first underground trains would stop, guided by landowner deals and sheer pragmatism. Not any vision for the city's future. Today, those choices still add over £40,000 to homes near tube stations and keep entire neighborhoods locked out. But why do some tube lines produce wealth while others barely move the needle? The answer starts beneath Victorian streets. On a cold January morning in 1863, the world's first underground railway ran its first passenger service under the streets of London. The Metropolitan Railway's route, stretching from Paddington to Farringdon, was far from inevitable. Its path was shaped by a tangle of Victorian priorities, money, property, and the stubbornness of those who owned the land above. Chief Engineer Sir John Fowler and City Solicitor Charles Pearson faced a maze of obstacles. Some were technical. The cut-and-cover method meant digging trenches along existing roads, like the New Road, now Marylebone Road, to avoid deep tunneling through unpredictable London clay. But the real challenge often came from above ground. Landowners with vast estates, men like the Duke of Westminster, refused to sell, fearing the noise and commotion would drive away wealthy tenants. In Mayfair and Belgravia, petitions and legal threats forced the line to skirt around their boundaries, leaving entire districts untouched by the new railway. Baker Street, now one of London's most famous stations, owes its place on the map to a mix of pragmatism and luck. The land was available, the route was feasible, and the opposition was less fierce than elsewhere. Other neighborhoods, less fortunate or less connected, would wait decades, sometimes a century, for a station of their own. The Metropolitan Railway Board minutes from 1859 record tense negotiations over every foot of track. Deals like the City of London's purchase of land at Farringdon for £200,000 paved the way for eastward expansion, while resistance elsewhere hardened the city's invisible boundaries. By the time the first train departed, the pattern was set. The tube would serve those who could be served and bypass those who could not or would not let it pass. That pattern still shapes the city's fortunes today. London's underground network did not spring up all at once. Each wave of construction added a new layer to the city's social fabric and left a mark that still shows up in property prices today. The earliest lines, laid down in the Victorian era, carved their way through the heart of wealth. The Metropolitan, District, and Circle lines, all built between the 1860s and the 1880s, served established neighborhoods like Kensington, Westminster, and Marylebone. These routes followed the money, winding through areas where landowners cooperated or where the city's power brokers could strike a deal. By the time the 20th century rolled around, the pattern was set. New lines like the Piccadilly, Bakerloo, and Northern filled in gaps, reaching out to the growing middle-class suburbs, but still circling the city's most exclusive districts. The hierarchy grew more pronounced as decades passed. By the 1960s, the Victoria Line stitched together high-demand neighborhoods, while the late 20th and early 21st centuries saw the network stretch into places the Victorians never touched. The Jubilee Line extension and the Elizabeth Line brought stations to the Docklands, Stratford, and Woolwich, areas once written off as too remote or too working class for the original planners. Yet, even as these new links sparked regeneration and price surges, the old lines kept their lead. In 2024, homes near the Circle Line average £729,000, while those along the Elizabeth Line hover around £401,000. The tube map became a kind of social X-ray. The oldest veins still pulse with the highest values, while newer lines chase the promise of catching up. The result is a city where the age of a train line can predict the price of a front door. A London address within 500 meters of a tube or rail station commands an average premium of £42,700, about 8% more than a similar home farther away. This gap is not just a quirk of estate agent optimism, it is grounded in decades of property data. The closer the front door is to a station, the higher the asking price climbs. At 750 meters, the premium drops to 5.6%. Stretch the walk to a full kilometer, and it falls again to 3.5%. The effect grows sharper in central London, where homes near Zone 1 stations can exceed £100,000 above the average, and the difference between a 10-minute and a 20-minute walk can mean £20,000 to £50,000 more on the sale price. In so-called transport deserts, places more than a kilometer from the nearest station, prices can be 20 to 30% lower, compounding year after year as jobs and investment cluster around the lines. The numbers reveal a city where convenience is currency, and the tube map doubles as a price list for every postcode. Every new tube station sends a ripple through London's property market. The effect is not just about convenience. It is a chain reaction that feeds on itself. As soon as a new line or extension is announced, developers and investors move in, often years before the first train runs. Prices start to climb on nothing but anticipation. It is not just homeowners who notice. Businesses, retailers, and even schools begin to plan for the influx. Jobs follow the tracks, clustering around stations. The promise of faster commutes attracts more buyers, who in turn drive up demand and prices even further. This is not a one-off event. It is a pattern, repeated every time a new connection appears on the map. The data backs it up. When the Elizabeth Line's route was revealed, areas like Woolwich and Abbey Wood saw price jumps before a single passenger boarded. The market does not wait for trains. It bets on them. Over time, the presence of a station cements a neighborhood's future. Areas with access get richer, drawing in more investment, while those left out fall further behind. The tube map becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, with each new station reinforcing the divide. Woolwich, once written off as a far-flung corner of southeast London, saw its fortunes turn overnight in May 2022. The first Elizabeth Line trains brought a surge of buyers and investors, pushing average home prices up by more than 10% in a single year. Within months, estate agents reported bidding wars on streets that had sat quiet for decades. The story played out in Stratford, too. Before the Olympics, it was a punchline for property pessimists. But after the Jubilee Line extension in 1999 and the arrival of Crossrail, prices doubled and new glass towers sprouted where factories once stood. Canary Wharf, now the financial heart of London, was little more than derelict docks until the Jubilee's arrival. Property values there soared by 200 to 300% over 2 decades, reshaping the skyline and the local economy. Even Hampstead, famous for its leafy lanes and the deepest tube station in London, owes its sky-high prices to a 1907 engineering gamble that put trains 58 meters below ground. In Brixton, grassroots campaigns in the 1960s secured a Victoria Line stop, and within 10 years, rents had climbed by 50%, shifting the area from social housing to private landlords. Each of these places became newly minted winners, not by accident, but by the arrival of a colored line on the map. South of the river, entire neighborhoods still wait for the kind of access their northern neighbors take for granted. Lewisham, for example, has watched property prices climb on little more than a promise. Just the proposal of a Bakerloo line extension sent average home values up by as much as 6.5%, outpacing the rest of London. Yet no diggers have arrived, and the funding gap remains. In places like Peckham and Camberwell, the absence of tube stations keeps prices 20 to 40% below those just a few stops away. For many, the map's old boundaries still feel left behind. Speculation does not wait for construction. Along the safeguarded route of Crossrail 2, investors snapped up homes as soon as plans were announced in 2013. In Wimbledon and Tottenham, rents and sales spiked by up to 21%, only to stall when the project paused in 2019. The route remains protected on paper, blocking new development, but there is no shovel in the ground. Lewisham residents watch and wonder if their windfall will ever become reality, or if they will be left behind again. The pattern is clear. Every new line redraws the city's fortunes, but the map's power goes unchecked, repeating the same winners and losers, decade after decade. Tube lines drawn 160 years ago still decide who can afford to call London home. As housing pressures mount, every proposed extension reignites the same debate: who gets access and who is left waiting. For millions, the map is not just history, it is destiny. What would you change?